Welcome to Rekindled Faith with Melanie Bearda. Whether you've been wrestling with questions, facing doubt, or simply just uninspired, let's dive into what it means to be authentic followers of Christ. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode. Today, I have a special guest here with us. Her name is maryjosharp. I'll let you introduce who you are and what you're attached to.
Okay. Well, hello. I'm, like you said, I'm Mary and I'm the founder and director of Confident Christianity, an apologetics ministry that I've had for a very long time. And I was formerly an assistant professor of apologetics, where I established a apologetics degree. In fact, it's kind of cool because it was the only all-female started apologetics degree. And so, or founded apologetics degree. So that's kind of unique. And so I do that. I'm also the spokesperson for a great apologetics program called Darkroom Faith, which has 14 short videos for youth and has a full curriculum. And that's to help them explore doubt and questions from their own language and way that Gen Z would, talk about their faith. So that's kind of what I'm doing. I also write and author a lot of books and do a lot of public speaking.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for being with us this week. I actually met maryjosharp in San Antonio, Texas at the Evangelical Theological Society. And I didn't recognize you at first. I did recognize your husband, though, because we follow each other on Instagram.
Yeah. I also have my curly hair. Like, my hair is naturally curly, so I was all curled up instead of my normal speaking picture hair.
Yeah, it was really cool to connect with both of you, though. And I feel like I'm just like a small time person, like coming out of the woodwork and like, hey, here I am. And then to recognize people and be like, hey, I know you from social media. It's pretty wild.
That's actually really cool, because back in like 2006, when two of my friends dragged me to ETS for the first time, that's exactly what happened. And not only that, but it was like the only female in the room at the Philosophical Society reception. So very much a standout at that. Like, I felt like what you're saying. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So, Mary Jo, I read your book, Why I Still Believe, a former atheist reckoning with the bad reputation Christians give a good God. And I thoroughly enjoyed reading your book. I found that a lot of the things that you brought forward were very relatable for my own story in a different context, because I grew up in Christianity and walked away, whereas you were an atheist and then you came to faith.
Yeah, a little different. It's still kind of the Canadian and the Northwest context, though. We still have kind of there's some similar culture there, even though, yours was Christian in your upbringing.
Yeah, totally. So what I wanted to discuss with you today in this conversation was when church doesn't feel like family. And maybe you can just start off with sharing your first initial experience from coming from an atheist background and then saying yes to Jesus and pursuing that relationship. Just kind of help us understand where you were coming from, how you got there, and what your first encounter with Christian faith and Christian people was like.
Okay, in 30 seconds, right?
Sure. We've got an hour, so you just go.
Okay, so I was raised in the Pacific Northwest of the United States, and it is a bit more post-Christian, postmodern. And my state in particular, Oregon, has, like, when you look at the sociological studies, even back to the 60s, there's been less religious participation overall in my state. So I grew up in an area that wasn't super culturally Christian. It's not like they weren't around. It's not like some of my friends weren't Christian, but it wasn't like the Bible Belt of the Southern United States with churches on every street corner and so many people going to church or have been in church. It was more likely that you would encounter people like me who weren't raised in church. So my upbringing was outside of the church. But what I did have was two parents who loved the arts. They loved the sciences. My dad was a chemical engineer who should have been a cosmologist. Like, he loved Carl Sagan and looking at it. the heavens. He used to wake me up in the middle of the night to watch meteor showers and such. So, and they both loved Shakespeare. They both loved the musical arts. In fact, I'm a musician myself, following after my dad, plays saxophone. So if anybody is out there, saxophonist, band kid, all right, that's a shout out to you guys. But so what they did do for me, what my parents raised with me with, was very culturally rich upbringing in the arts and sciences. And because of their love of Shakespeare in part, and then just looking out at the universe and pondering things, I began to have questions as I got older about, what is my place in all of this? And is the earth really just, this pale blue dot or a speck of dust? What does that even mean in the grand scheme of things? And, how do I find meaning, purpose, and value in such a vast universe? Now, of course, when I was a kid, I'm not framing it that way, but that's basically what was going on in my mind. And so I began to have questions about, what is my place in this universe? What happens when we die? Is you are born, you die, and that's all there is. You cease to exist. So about the time when I'm starting to formalize like these questions, it was near the end of my high school years. And I had a music teacher, my band teacher, who was a Christian who felt very burdened for me. And he was somebody I very much respected because I did go on to get a music education degree because I wanted to teach music like he did. I wanted to show students this love of music like he showed us. So he was somebody I really respected. And he gave me for graduation, one of the gifts he gave me was a Bible. And he said, when you go off to college, you're going to have hard questions. I hope you'll turn to this. Well, sort of hit me at just like the right time. And I was open to exploring, this gift and reading. And when I, in short, this is all in short form, but reading through the Bible made me realize that my sense of wonder and, what is all this, not just what is my place in the universe, but what is all this beauty for? What is all this intelligence, this rationality that I see everywhere? Where is this all coming from? Well, when I started reading the Bible, it made sense to me that there was a creator. And like, as I'm following through the stories, I'm going, okay, this is starting to make sense of what I believe. So when I went off to college, I did the opposite of what parents are usually worried about. And instead of, having my faith challenged, I started exploring faith for the first time and going to churches on my own. And so I'm going to condense the story a little bit here. I did meet my husband in college very early on, and we got married young. And he was like, "Oh my goodness, we need to go to church," because he was a good old Southern Baptist boy raised in a small town in Oklahoma. So you got to get his family in church, So we got invited to a church, and that was where I first heard the gospel presented in a way that made sense to me and was making sense of all of that I had been learning, of my need for salvation. That it's not going to, humans aren't able to save themselves because they're the problem. This is not going to happen. It like logically made sense to me. And that was where I accepted Jesus and trusted him for salvation. But then quickly afterwards, I started to see some things in the church that were disturbing to me. And I think that's what we're going to talk about a little bit today. So I'll pause there.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing. I find like in my own journey, I've never really, like prior to becoming interested in theology and apologetics and giving my life back over to Christ, I never really considered the atheists that would move into relationship with God. And I know that there are a lot of people even today that go to college and instead of pursuing all the like, I don't know, drugs, sex, and party, they're like looking for God and looking for Jesus. And I think sometimes we forget about that because as a Christian bubble, I think that we can more so be worried about our kids going into the negative things than even like recognizing how if we raise up our kids in the way that they should go and then we let them go, they could be pulling people to God too, like empowering and encouraging people into the relationship with God that we get to have. So it's
Yeah.
just like different perspectives, right? Sometimes I don't think about these things and then one day I do. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah.
So like hearing, and that's where really my love of listening to other people's stories and testimonies, I've learned so much from people that have just been willing to sit with me and tell me where they came from, what they've been through, how God has redeemed their story, and what they've done with it afterwards. Because as a teenager, I used to just perceive everybody at like the surface level. Like I call people like an iceberg, not in being cold and aloof or anything like that, but in the sense that we only see what's above the surface. We can't see what's underneath unless we ask
Mm.
those questions and try to engage in that story.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're only with most people, you're only getting that surface, what they're showing you, not the
Yeah,
depth of who they are. Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, so I've appreciated learning that and being able to recognize that. So yeah, when the church doesn't feel like family, man, so many of us have been burned by people in the church or burned by what we would call the church, just like the way that things are represented or presented, or the little condescending remarks that can come from people that come to church and call themselves Christian and everything like that. And we're not here to like say like fill out a list of like who's not a Christian, who is a Christian. The Bible tells us that you will know them by their fruits, whether or not they are following in the footsteps of God and pursuing that righteous relationship and being sanctified by
Yeah.
scripture. So, but what I want to talk with you about is, can you share that story that we both know that you have about coming into the church and just your heart posture in that moment, that vulnerability, and how you were greeted, and just kind of how that mental dialogue happened afterwards of you having to wrestle through that particular moment.
Yeah. So that was, yeah, it was a big surprise to me because here I am reading the scriptures on my own and, exploring faith for the first time. And in my sort of naivety, and I'm also an idealist, I'm thinking, wow, I've found this community that's going to be searching for all the same things that I was searching for. And that's going to be their focus. Like they are going to be so focused on the beauty and the goodness of God. And so I'm excited to join a church. So I should back up a little bit for those who don't know. After I accepted Jesus, one of the things that you're encouraged to do is to join a church, right? So you can get teaching and community and with like-minded people. And so my first Sunday going to a church to tell them that I have accepted Jesus and I want to join this particular church. I'm super excited, but I'm also concerned because coming from my background, I'm afraid of what people back home would think of, what I've done. Because, like I said, it's not culturally Christian, and so I'm wondering if they think, well, she got brainwashed down there in the South, because I went to college in the South. So I'm wondering what they're thinking, and I'm nervous because I didn't grow up in a Christian environment, so I don't know the church culture. And that's, I'm worried about, before I go, I'm worried about silly things like, am I dressed appropriately? Because I don't go to church, so I don't really know what to wear. And, I'm nervous because I'm making this big commitment. So, yeah, I fuss a little bit over what I'm wearing. My husband is like, you're fine. You look beautiful. You're a beautiful woman. You're great. Don't worry about this. So we head into this church where I have to set this up because I'm going to walk up the aisle at this church after the service, with everybody watching, and tell them, hey, I've trusted Jesus for my salvation. And as a Pacific Northwesterner and an introvert, that is already so far out of my comfort zone because I was raised with the idea that religion is private. And, then on top of that, I just kind of like to keep that to myself. So this was hard for me. So as we're coming up to the doors of the church sanctuary, we see that there is we'll just say a lady there who is one of the leaders in the church, and she's greeting everybody. How are you? How's your kids? She's smiling, yada, yada, yada. So we approach and she sees me. She looks at me. Her eyes go up and down over what I'm wearing. Her smile drops and she says, oh, honey, we need to find you better clothes. So that's my hello. How are you? I mean, this woman knows that I am going to be walking the aisle that day and telling everybody that I've accepted Jesus. And that was not what I was expecting. I think I was expecting more of, wow, I heard that, you've trusted Christ for your salvation. Welcome. This is so exciting. Something like that. But what I got was judgmentalism immediately. And that really threw me because like that first step of, wait a minute, what what are we focused on? And it caused a little bit of anger, but I was more confused. The anger came later, like that was not appropriate. And then I started to like, that was probably a seed of distrust, is what I will say, in leadership in the church, because they're focused on the wrong things. And so I would love to say that that was the worst thing I've ever experienced. But as you've already alluded to, for Christians across the board, it's obviously not. That's the one I talk about because it's a little more easy to access and digest for people. But yeah, I saw much worse. And over the years of ministry, where my husband and I were ministering in our local churches. And then, of course, even lately, we've heard much worse coming out of the church in the public realm.
Yeah, and I feel like there's a lot of us that have experienced situations like that where we come up in vulnerability, we expose ourselves, we've now given our lives over to Christ. We want this family, this unity, this community that we are told that we will get from being in the church environment. And then how many times things like that come up in our moment or our season of vulnerability, and it hits hard and it hits really deep.
Yeah.
And like I have situations in my own journey too where I've experienced different things like that where I've just haven't felt good enough. And by the grace of God, I've also got the counter to that where I've had seasons of vulnerability in my faith where people have come alongside me and been like, yes, Melanie, yes, God is good. And so I've got like, it kind of weighs out, but I just I just appreciate the fact that you are willing to share this part of your story and this encounter, because I feel like a lot of times we don't, or we don't really know how to process it, and then the outcome tends to be more commonly, I think, which I could be wrong, I'm just one person, but typically, I believe that people are more inclined to walk away from religion, walk away from faith in Christ, and just give up on church in general, and just like throw it all out because of that kind of experience that they've encountered somebody that has been judgmental towards them and their season of their faith.
Yeah. Yeah. Because they're reading that, the Christians are the ones who care for the marginalized, the poor and the needy. And, Jesus is hanging out with the sinners. And then they're being marginalized in their own churches for, banal things like what they're wearing. When there's a lot more going on, like you said, the part of the iceberg that's below the surface, that's where they feel like they're joining a church to have community below the surface, right? To develop themselves and mature under Christ. And so that requires emotional maturity and, relational intelligence. And when people come in, and in my experience, when they see that in the church, we're really not socially much different than any other social organization or situation, then they start to say, wait a minute, what does the church have to offer here? Right? I can get this at the local atheist donut eating club. I don't have to go to a church for this interaction. And so when the church is not attentive to how we are emotionally and relationally intelligent amongst our congregants, or the leadership to the congregation or to each other, then I think we really do a disservice to the gospel message itself, to the great love, like Francis Schaeffer's final apologetic. The love that Christians show for one another is what he calls the final apologetic. I mean, that's pretty strong. So we need to be more attentive to that part of that understanding that we're supposed to be maturing unto Christ is an intention to work on ourselves so that we're not just perpetuating, and I will use the psychological term, we're not just perpetuating childhood traumas of our own and our own poor coping mechanisms, but that we're actually letting the Spirit work on us and develop us into mature believers in Christ so that we can be there for others.
Absolutely. It's kind of like being on the airplane. If you end up in turbulence or whatever and that mask drops down, you have to put it on your own face before you can help somebody next to you. Otherwise, you can very quickly be useless because you don't have oxygen.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's something that's near and dear to my heart too, because even in the the like church hurt that I've experienced, I've made the decision to press into Jesus in those seasons and to choose to dig in deeper into the word and spending that time in prayer and just trying to wrestle with it. Like I, in my early days of coming back to Christ, like I would drive for an hour to go and visit my family, and I would scream, cry at God for that whole trip as I was just like processing things that were going on in my life and just trying to like move through the emotions and that trauma and that hurt of just feeling like I would never be good enough for the church and feeling like no matter what I did, I just never measure up or, become part of the in crowd, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. That's a real. You're making a point that really needs to be pointed out, even in my field of apologetics, that the manner in which we treat people, our process of Christianity, is also so important because we're dealing with human beings who are greatly valued individually by God, and so we need to be attentive to how we're treating the individuals in our church so that they're not screaming all the way for an hour in the car, right?
Right? Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And yeah, so I don't know, like I would love to hear how you took like your experiences, not just the one with how you were dressed when you first showed up, but all of those experiences. How did you move through the process of choosing God instead of choosing to walk away when that was very clearly an option and an option that many people do end up taking instead of moving closer to God?
Yeah, yeah. So I can speak to my experience, and hopefully somebody out there can relate to it. So what happened for me was I started saying, okay, wait a minute. These people are professing God as the standard of goodness, right? So He's the model, and they constantly use the term becoming Christ-like. But I'm not seeing much of that. I see people who profess God, but they're not attempting intentionally to model or to, Christ-likeness or to grow towards Christ's example. So they'll say things, but then they're not going to do them. And so that caused me some distrust, like, wait a minute, do these people really believe in God at all? Or is this just something that they've been raised in, or that's something they do because it's something to do on a Sunday and a Wednesday and whatever else? So I started to say, okay, wait a minute, why did I originally say that I trusted in God? What do I know about God? How do I know the Bible is real? How do I know, or not real, something I can trust? How do I know God's real? And I realized that I did not have good answers to those parts. So intellectually, I wasn't developed in my Christianity. And so I started to look around for, is anybody talked about this? And I actually found Lee Strobel's book, The Case for Christ. Somebody had put it in our church library. And that really opened my eyes to the first time. Oh, there are people handling these kinds of questions. So the deep questions that I have are being asked and have been dealt with. But see, I didn't have any of that. There's no deep background in the Christian philosophical tradition going on in my life. So I had no idea. I had no idea that the problem of evil was one of the most often written about problems by Christian philosophers. And I hear people today say, we're not talking about the problem of evil in the church. And it just blows me away. But so for me, I kind of understand that because I couldn't find it either, just in my local church. So what reading the book did for me is it caused me to say, okay, there's the Christians responding. What do the atheists have to say in response to that? Because I didn't also have like a deep background in atheistic philosophy or some of these other areas. So I started to investigate debates between some of the top Christian thinkers and some of the top atheist thinkers. And that, as I was getting into the debates and reading more, I came around to understanding, first of all, I didn't think the arguments from the atheist side were as satisfying to me. So intellectually satisfying. And then secondly, my beliefs actually aligned with a Christian philosophical framework. So I actually believe in things like justice and good and evil, and that they have a grounding somewhere, that they're not just constructs of human language and such. So I was like, oh, I actually do have a Christian philosophical framework, or you might say worldview. And that was really eye-opening to me, but it also kind of was heartbreaking because now I couldn't just step away from the church because that's my Christian community. Because when we say the church, we're talking about all the believers in Christ. So I knew that I like came around to say, okay, just because Christians don't act, the way they should, the Christian behaviors could not be the litmus test for the truth of Christianity. And that caused me to say, okay, so now what? Now what am I going to do now that I know that I am in this community? That's who I am. But I've had such bad experiences with local churches that I need to figure out, like, what's the root of that. And, I came up with some things like I share too much and I trust too quickly, which is funny because I'm also untrusting. So I don't know how those go together. But I realized one of the things I had to do, and I'll sort of wrap up here so you can jump back in. But one of the things I had to do was I had to be more mature in who I trusted, especially with vulnerability, like you've been talking about.
So good and so relatable to my story too. It's like word vomit. Like I used to just like, this is everything about me. Now you know all of my like secrets and everything about me, and then people would just like kind of like scamper off, and then I'm like, oh, why did you leave me? And then I get so worked up about it. I don't do that anymore, but when I do that, it's the stuff that I've already processed through and no longer has that level of insecurity and vulnerability attached to it.
Yeah.
Because like I share my testimony quite often, and I have no problem divulging all that information because it brings glory to God and it redeems that story that he's redeemed for me. But yeah, I just totally related with that. And then also I just want to like point out to our listeners, everything that you've just described, you are doing the footwork, the groundwork. You were actively seeking out truth to understand exactly what the difference is and how you really fit in with Christian like theology and all that. Taking the time to look for books, look for speakers, but also I also want to point out like the willingness to see the other side. I think a lot of times we can stay in that Christian bubble of just reading and searching out things that align with what we want to believe instead of actually dipping our toes into what other people believe. I've learned a lot from atheists of just listening to how they process things, what they believe or why they believe it. And like more recently, I've learned that for some of them, they believe that they're saving the world by getting rid of Christianity type of thing. Whereas I'm a Christian, I'm like, Jesus loves everybody. Like, let's just be a happy family and glorify God. And like, I can be in my bubble. But then to realize, oh, okay, these little keyboard warriors on the internet also have that vision within themselves that they're saving the world from my sky daddy, as they like to call him sometimes. Right. So it's like to understand the other side and what they are talking about, what they are believing, what they are processing. But I also want to point out how important it is, like we've already talked about, having our own understanding of God in the midst of that before we start diving into the other side. I wouldn't go out and say, hey, you're doubting in your faith, you should start hanging out with atheists, because I don't know if that would be beneficial. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's good to have, like, what is it that I believe, and unpack
Yeah,
that. And I think some people, like what you're getting at is some people will jump ship too soon when they don't really know their own ship, right?
exactly.
They're like a passenger, but they're not an engineer yet. And so you need to know what it is you believe and what, like, not even just the Christian framework. What are your beliefs? Are you a person that believes in the concept of justice as a real thing? Okay, now where does that come from? How are you grounding that? And really think through some of that. And I know people might say, wow, that just sounds really boring and philosophical. Uh-huh. Yeah. It's also necessary for when you do things, like the causes that you believe in, the way you think people should be treated for human rights issues. These all have to have a grounding somewhere. And I don't find people in general spend a lot of time there. And I'm not faulting people for that. A lot of us are just trying to get by. We're trying to make ends meet. We're trying to survive. But this is something, like, if you are considering changing your whole philosophical paradigm, like Christian to atheist or atheist to Christian, it is important to understand, well, what are my beliefs about the universe I live in? And then to look through the very, okay, so what do people say against this? And what do they say, on from different perspectives, like you've said.
Yeah, absolutely. I also think of like in my own personal experience, when I don't fully understand what I believe and somebody comes at me for it, I kind of get easily offended and defensive,
Yeah.
right? And then I try to like shut it down, but that's not very helpful. And I find the more that I investigate what I believe and spend time in the Word and read books that help me to understand my worldview and apologetics and theology, the more calm I am when people come towards me and say bah, 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 about my faith, because then I'm like, okay, well, I can understand where you're coming from, and I respect that you are a person. You're an image bearer of God, even if you don't believe in God. And so I need to show you that gentleness and respect. But at the same time, I feel more rooted in what I do believe, and I can speak and articulate in a way that doesn't leave that person, slandering. Well, they might still, but you know what I mean? Like, I'm not like yelling at this person, like, yeah.
Yeah,
So,
it's a good point. Yeah, I said in my book, sometimes it feels like in the conversation on religion that atheists and Christians have become polarized with each other in the public sphere, and it shouldn't be that way. If we're both seeking what is true about the universe in which we live, we're both seeking deeper philosophical truths as well as scientific truths, then we should be able to have a good conversation. So when it does get defensive or heated, there's something else going on, and it's not related to the propositional knowledge that we're discussing.
yeah. I know I've got atheists in my life that I can go to and be like, "Hey, what is this? Like, what do your people believe about this?" And like, we can have a dialogue and a discussion and disagree, and it doesn't
Yeah.
turn into anything heated. It's just like, okay, well, you believe that, but I believe this, and it's like kind of learning from each other and understanding, which I really appreciate. Coming because like I'm new to apologetics and even theology. Like, I grew up in Christianity. I had that cookie cutter life, and it wasn't working for me, so I walked away from it. And then when I came back, I spent a lot of time just by myself in that relationship with God, trying to heal all that hurt. And then, yeah, I've said this before on my podcast, but I had a non Christian friend that came out and was like posting anti Christian memes on Facebook and Instagram. And I'm like, that's not what I believe at all. Like, what's going on? And then I tried to ask them about it, and then they got offended and all the things. And so I'm like, okay, maybe I need to better understand what I believe and how to articulate it and how to share it with other people in a way that doesn't leave people, just doesn't get messy, doesn't have to get messy.
Right. It doesn't have to get messy. That's a good conversation, and comes out of a care and concern for the other person. And like you've been quoting, without saying that it's First Peter 3:15, that we're to be prepared to give that reason, the defense of the reason of our hope, but with gentleness and respect. But if you keep going on in Peter, all the way through 17, uh, in case you're wondering what gentleness and respect looks like, Peter's very explicit to say, in good conscience, you're to give these answers in good conscience, so that you cannot be slandered for your good behavior. Like, there is nothing to accuse you of. And I really feel like in the cultural climate that we're in, sometimes people become very pragmatic, in which the ends justifies the means. So I can treat my conversation partner however I want. I can be belligerent, I can be angry, I can use, soundbite slander, I can take them out of context, and it doesn't matter as long as I'm communicating truth. And I think that is a very unbiblical view. I think you have to go back to expand out First Peter 3 and say, we're not supposed to be able to be accused of evil. And Peter even says, so that when you suffer, it's not because of your own evil. Now, I'm paraphrasing that passage, but that's what he's telling you. You're not supposed to suffer for your own evil doings. And when you're having these conversations, you're supposed to suffer for doing the right thing, for doing good, and being there for others, like you've said, for the people who are made in the image of God.
Yeah, and I also want to bring up a couple other things that came to mind as you were speaking. First of all, you said that you had to think back and remember what you believed and why you gave your life to Christ, right?
Yes.
And Yeah, and I just wanna, like, kinda hammer that one in a little bit because I think in my own personal walk, but also in those like, in the people that I've walked with, a lot of times we can get complacent and forget. And in the Bible, God often calls his people to, like, build a not a statue, but, like, a memorial or an altar to remember what God has done in their life. And
Mm.
so for those of you that are listening, if you're in a season of forgetting, or even if you're like thriving in your faith journey right now, I would encourage you to write out a journal entry of why you first gave your life to Christ, or just like that process, even if you've grown up in Christian faith, that moment when you chose it for yourself. Write that out in a journal entry and keep that somewhere close by. So, in those seasons of complacency and like emotional isolation and frustration and even doubt, that you can pull that forward and read through it and be reminded of what God has done in your life and why you've chosen to seek out that relationship with him.
Yeah. That's good. I do some journaling. I'm not real faithful on it. I'm more faithful on writing out prayer requests, and then I put the date of the prayer request, and then I put a date if I felt that it was answered. So that I can kind of look back and go, oh, yeah, a lot of things have come to pass. I'm just not paying attention in the moment, right? Because we tend to be in the moment and not see. Francis Bacon says we tend not to see beyond the end of our nose.
Yeah, I know. I keep a journal. I'm not as faithful as I once was, but it's actually prayers, like you said, to God. So I'll be like, "Dear Jesus," and then I'll write whatever it is. But I like that point of coming back to it and writing down if it's been answered or when it's been answered or how. I like that because it kind of ties it all up.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the other point that I really wanted to bring out was, as you were also sharing, it came to mind, like, we talked about that iceberg and how there's something more underneath the surface. And I feel like for those of us that may have experienced church hurt or church trauma or whatever you want to call it, there is, like, sometimes we can see through our own lens of, you know, like, how am I trying to say this? Sometimes we can see ourselves as being the iceberg, and we don't actually look at the people that are attending church as also being icebergs and having something under the surface. So for those people that have caused you pain within the church, that have said the wrong thing or excluded you in some way, they have an iceberg living underneath the surface of their water as well, which, I mean, that doesn't excuse what they have done to you, what they have said to you, but just being able to recognize that there are different seasons for all of us that are pursuing this relationship with God. And I know for me, like, I've gone through seasons where I've failed miserably at showing up and being a good Christian because I was so fixated on my own hurts and whatever I thought I had been wronged by, that I wasn't willing to like take ownership for the areas that I was causing harm to other people. So just allowing, as you have already said too, allowing the Spirit to cleanse you of all of that. And as you're digging deeper into the truth of who God is, that you're allowing that sanctification process to be like happening within your spirit. And the importance of being willing and actually taking action on admitting when we're wrong and owning up to when we have sinned against other people. I can tell you, like, it's happened a couple times to me where people have come up to me and been like, "Hey, Melanie, I am so sorry that I treated you poorly," because they had now learned something underneath the surface of my iceberg. And so they realized that there was something going on. And so they came back and apologized for how they had treated me. That spoke volumes to me. If they would have just like, oh, wow, that like, kept it to themselves and like kept on with life, I think that I wouldn't have been able to like God ultimately does the healing, but that just aided so much in the healing process. So just being able to recognize that we can also be the ones to take ownership for our own faults, because Lord knows we all have faults and shortcomings.
Yeah. Yeah. I have, that is absolutely, yeah, that's true. And I have a little different way that I express some of the, like how I've dealt with it. And part of it is that study of the problem of evil. When I said early on that, I realized, well, if humans are the problem, if they're causing the problems, then they can't be the solution. just really deeply studying that and figuring out that this problem of evil, of human pain and suffering, specifically as a result of human action, human choice, and what we're doing in this world, it's not something that's going to escape anybody. First of all, we're all going to experience pain and suffering, but also we are all going to fail. And if you want to put it into black and white, that's we're going to do evil. So if it's good and evil, we are going to participate in evil in small ways, like we're tired and so we're petty to people around us, or in big ways, like and people who embezzle from their own churches and things like that. People are involved with evil, and I started to realize that the people around me are not going to. That's not going to stop. Everyone's going to fail, including me, and they're going to hurt each other. They're going to hurt themselves, and this is going to continue on until the resurrection. And so I was like, okay, that first realization made me understand better the world in which I lived and stop wishing that everybody would just do the right thing, because it's just not going to happen. So then what happened? Then I was like, okay, so now what, God? Like I got that realization. Well, he didn't leave me stranded. In Luke 6, Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, he actually taught on that. And he said in Luke 6, he said the phrase, do unto others as you want others to do unto you, or the back up a little bit, and the love your enemies, do good to those who persecute you. Why would he tell us to do that? Because we're all like, you know how hard that is? Well, I figured out he told me to do that so that I can live in the redemption that he offered to me, because he was the first one to do good to those who were doing evil by dying on the cross and resurrecting from the dead and offering us a new life. So it doesn't have to be mired in the problem of evil. So what we can do in circumstances is what we can do. With like Jesus didn't say, hey, like let's fix the other person's problems first. He said, love your enemies, do good to those who persecute you. And then if you're still kind of he said, what good is it if you just love those who love you? And then he says, even the sinners do that. So basically, anybody can do that. You can love people who are good to you. That's just easy. The hard part is to do what I call Gandalfing the situation, whereas you know what's good, you know what is good for you, for the universe in which you live, for the world around you, and you know people are going to continue to fail you, but you make the choice to do what is good. You make the choice to do what is right. And if you're a Harry Potter fan, you can say Dumbledore's words, between choosing what is right and what is easy. So we can all do what's easy, but doing what's right is long, involved, complicated, hard. It hurts. It's disappointing. It gets rid of a lot of that naivety and idealism. But at the same time, it's kind of holding on to the ideals of Jesus, realizing he is the one that's demonstrating to us perfection and love and the unconditional love. And so when we talk about, and let me wrap up here, but when we talk about sitting in the scriptures, sitting with Christ, or just really marinating in prayer over these things, what we're talking about is making the choices to do things that cause human flourishing for yourself, right? And then as you become more familiar with Jesus's teachings, as you become more familiar with what you actually believe, as you become more relationally involved with Christ by talking to him, prayer, just having a conversation with God, right? My prayers don't look all formulated. They're just like, spur of the moment throughout the day, like, oh man, here we go again, right? As you do those things, you are developing yourself. You're emotionally, relationally, intelligently maturing. And that's what becoming Christ-like is, becoming more like that model, choosing to do the hard, choosing to do the right over what's expedient or easy, or, which can cause harm. So this is an important point, is that what does Christ-likeness look like? And that's what we've been discussing, is we're not nullifying your pain or saying that it wasn't horrific or that the trauma doesn't matter. That not at all. We're saying that because of Christ's death on the cross and resurrection, he is offering you to partner with you through the Holy Spirit to help you choose to do good, even when people around you are failing you horrifically.
Yeah, thank you for that. Just as we like come towards the end of the podcast, I'd love for you to walk us through what can we do when church doesn't feel like family? What are some things that you would encourage other people that are struggling in their walk within the church community?
Yeah. That's such a tough one because it's so many different scenarios that are involved there. I can speak out of my own experience, which is that I try to find people who are like minded with me rather than force myself into a situation where I don't fit. And I know some Christians would probably be like, "Well, then you'll never find a place." Well, that's not actually true. Culturally, I fit a little bit better into churches where women don't have to put on a whole bunch of makeup and dress up to the nines. I fit better in an area where we all look like we're going on a hike after church. So that fits me better. I feel more comfortable in that situation. I feel more accepted for who I am. So find places where you tend to fit better. That's one thing you can do. Another thing is really, kind of vet people for trust. Can you trust the leadership? Can you trust this church to be for Christ? Are they demonstrating to you a maturity in their own leadership? And then have realistic expectations. Yeah, they're leaders and they're sinful human beings who will fail you. So what are those lines that can't be crossed, right? What are the lines that are like, oh, well, yeah, they're human. So, try to work on that. What does a church look like that would be good for you and would support you? And I'm looking for a church that is emotionally intelligent, or at least working on that, that identifies that spiritual formation is not some voodoo magic, but is actually just the Spirit working on you, and a church congregation and working through discipleship to teach their people that you have to intend to become relationally intelligent with God and His Spirit. You have to actually do something. It doesn't just poof magically happen because you accepted Christ. So I'm looking for those kinds of things. But yeah, I would say not just a church. Find the people who are family to you. Find the Christians who love you for who you are, where you're at, and will accept you there and walk alongside you. So individuals, not just, because remember, the church is the Christians. It's not a building. It's not a specific location. And so there's a lot of believers throughout time and history. And in fact, a lot of different churches across the world that feel very different from probably the ones that have hurt you.
Yeah, so good. Okay, so just like we're coming up to the end, and I'd love for you to share just kind of what you're doing within your own ministry now. And I know that you're very involved in apologetics and just whatever that looks like for you at this moment. And then also, where can people connect with you?
Yes, we can connect with me at maryjosharp.com, my website. You can also connect with me on Instagram. For whatever reason, I kind of live there. I'm not sure why. Maybe I'll get over to TikTok. We'll see.
I
But I
tried I tried sorry to interrupt. I
That's right.
tried TikTok for a year and I blew up in my followers. I just don't have time to take all those little videos and edit them and put words on them. I'm a mom. I'm a stay-at-home mom. I ain't got time for that. So I
Yeah.
I also live at Instagram.
Yeah. So I heard, chef.
So,
That's why my problem entering into TikTok has been is the time that it takes to edit and put them together. But so I do have an Instagram account. I have the pastor and professor is our Patreon account. You can find some videos there and support my work there. I'm currently the spokesperson for Darkroom Faith. And we had our first season of that program, which was the 14 videos that is Gen Z narrative driven. And so I'd love for anybody to check out Darkroom Faith. We do offer this curriculum fully free online to help serve underserved ministries. So that's something that you can go check out, darkroomfaith.com. And then also I'm an author, I'm a speaker. You can find my works on Amazon at Zondervan. You can invite me to speak through my website, and we can discuss lots of different topics. But those are the things that I'm working on and that I do. I love conversing with people, especially when people differ from my point of view.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And again, like, thank you for taking the time out of your busy day to come and connect with us on Rekindled Faith.
Yeah, it was lovely to be here. Thank you for the invite.
All right, listeners, I hope that you were encouraged and inspired by Mary Jo's testimony and just the words that she shared with us this week about choosing to dig into our relationship with God, despite the fact that sometimes we may experience church hurt within our community. I just pray that you would be inspired by this conversation that we had this week, and I look forward to connecting with you again next week as we have another female author of an apologetic book coming on the podcast. We'll see you then.